Hello, everyone. To introduce myself, I'm Murigi, based in Kenya. I'm an agricultural economist by training. I'm completing a PhD and writing in the area of contract farming, agricultural technology adoption by smallholder farmers, and food security. And I also lead a community-based organization by the name Focusways, SAG, that promotes cultivation of improved varieties of the drought-resistant or drought-tolerant cassava among drought-vulnerable communities across East Africa. I'm happy to join this discussion. Thank you.
Hi guys, I'm Emily. I am a first-year law student in Canada at Queen's University. My undergraduate study was in health sciences. My background is partially Indigenous Canadian, Algonquin, and partially French Canadian. And so growing up, I recognized a lot of the issues such as food and water insecurity in Canada from living in these communities. And then when I got to health science, my school focused a lot on the statistics of Indigenous Canadians and how it causes food insecurity leads to diabetes and heart disease. And I wanted to make a positive change. So I went to some communities in the subarctic and built greenhouses and participated with ministers, roundtable discussions on how to improve food insecurity in Canada. And now that I'm in law school, I'm trying to focus a little bit on the legislative side, working with professors in food policy. And this summer, prior to Corona, I was going to work with Agriculture Canada on their food policy. So yeah, I'm really passionate about this issue, and I'm really interested to hear other communities, how they're addressing it as well.
Does anyone want to jump in? I guess there's a small group. You could all maybe introduce yourself, unless you have a particular question for Emily around kind of her view from Canadian Indigenous angle, because I know it might be new to some of you. And if not, just say hi and what you do. Maybe if there's anything COVID-19 kind of relevant that might be good for Emily to hear before she has to go.
My name is Lamjar. I'm in Kenya right now. I'm an athlete. Officially, like let's say a few years ago, I was actively involved in athletics as a professional athlete. I was one of the first Olympic refugee team that competed in Rio in 2016. So at some points, I had to pause running and focus on my higher education project. So I completed my undergraduate in business, and now I'm working with refugees, doing a lot of sports with refugees, and I have a COVID-19 response program that is going on right now, and I'm happy that, yeah, so far, no case in the refugee camps, which could be worse if it actually happens to have cases there, because there is no social distancing and there's no enough of everything. Let's say soaps, masks, and all that. So there's no case so far in Kakuma, but we are prepared to respond to it. So yeah, we have been working on the project. We have distributed more than 200 masks to people in the refugee camps, and the project is ongoing right now. And we are scaling it to the neighboring refugee camp in Dadaab refugee camp. And yeah, it's responding, and I'm happy that we are doing this, for the vulnerable. So we have been thinking of the urban refugees who are actually now vulnerable and have no source of income. So this is what gives me a lot of sleepless nights, how they are going to survive. Yeah. Being one of them also in Nairobi. So yeah, so I'm thinking about what to do with the whole group of my team. And I'm happy to hear from you, Michael and Emily, on that, because together with the IOC right now, we have a program on how we can improve diet in the refugee camp, because Olympics is next year, and we want to keep these people as fit, though the weather are in the camps are not really friendly. They are very harsh, and the temperatures range from 40 and above. So training can't do well right there, and there is no movement between counties. So we are trying to work on improving how they can be physically active and not lose what they have been doing for the last few years.
Great, thank you. Emily, I just wanted to ask, is there anything that you've seen firsthand related to food in the communities that you kind of work for or fight for policy for that has been exacerbated, particularly that might be unique to them, or might be something that maybe is actually quite similar to what could be happening in the camps? We've got quite a lot of young leaders that work in different kind of refugee camps or areas where people can't travel in and out of.
Yeah, in terms of non-communicable diseases, diabetes, heart disease, I worked for a lot of communities that are around 300, 400 people, and about 2/3 of most of these communities have diabetes as a result of food insecurity. And low access to medical care, because believe it or not, like flights to these communities are around $7,000 Canadian, whereas like a flight to Florida, for example, which is the same distance, would be like $500. So it's really hard to get medical care to these communities. And there is almost a direct link between the food insecurity and diabetes and heart disease. So yeah, definitely we can relate to the issue of non-communicable diseases on this front for sure.
Do you think, so in Australia, we have a young leader that works in Aboriginal communities over there, and they found that as well as the kind of traditional food insecurity, they've found that the kind of logistics of getting food to them has meant that they're only really getting the kind of the long life food that gets through, but also the cost of these has gone up in some places by like ×6 just because it's kind of not at the top of the list. Is that a similar situation?
Yes, a head of lettuce I've seen costs upward of $40 in places like a Calloway. Like a case of bottled water costs more than $100, although that has a longer preservation or shelf life than food and vegetables. But I lived in one community where they only got fruits and vegetables one Wednesday every 2 or 3 weeks. And then a lot of people would kind of go quickly, get the fruits and vegetables that were there, and then they would sell out really fast. So not everyone had access to them. Yeah. So yeah, it's definitely because of colonization, there's a lack of traditional food and knowledge surrounding traditional food practices, but also lack of access to healthy perishable foods, and those that are available, especially in the northern climates, they're very, very expensive.
Mm-hmm. It's 40 for lettuce. It's mad, isn't it?
Yeah, it's crazy.
And that's kind of, I think you work in policy and stuff around that. Is that something that has just been traditionally kind of ignored by the government?
Yes. And it's kind of, prior to, there's a lot of history between the relationship between Indigenous peoples and the Canadian government, but prior to 2015, our current Prime Minister really placed, significance around these issues, and that's when people started placing more attention to them. But prior to that, it was kind of don't ask, don't tell. And it was kind of seen as it's been 100 years. Indigenous people should have figured out by now, but there's issues with displacement. I had to ship in actual soil from other places because it's not possible. The land isn't fertile enough to grow food in some of these places. So yeah, it was definitely prior to the 2015 election. It was an issue that went completely unnoticed.
Mhm.
So yeah, definitely that as well.
Am I right that generationally there are still grandparents' age that would have been placed into the kids' homes, and yeah, that's the generation. So it's still generations interacting.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah. So I suppose there's, yeah, then trust issues around accessing things and medical. And what about language and communication, the way that kind of information is getting to the different communities? Is that an issue or not so much?
There has been efforts around language revitalization, but most communities are losing their languages and adopting English instead.
Yeah.
And surprisingly, there's a lot of Inuit and First Nations communities in Quebec, where Quebec is all completely French, but all of these communities speak English. So I think if there were to be language barriers, it would be between communities that are located in Quebec and Quebec peoples.
That's interesting. Wouldn't have even thought about that, would you?
No, and it's pretty crazy, but the language barrier isn't such a problem. It's more losing languages traditionally.
Yeah.
But the people in Iqaluit and Nunavut, Inuit peoples are really keeping their languages, and a lot of them are trilingual, so they speak Inuktitut, French and English.
Michael, is there anything you want to hop in with?
First, I think we should define what food security is, because it's quite broad and a comprehensive concept.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the foremost organizations in this space, that is the United Nations Food and Agriculture Organization, define food security, or state food security is achieved when all people at all times have physical and economic access to sufficient, safe, and nutritious food for their dietary needs and preferences for an active and healthy life. And I can mention that according to an estimate that was given by the World Food Program, 200 million people around the world are always chronically food insecure, even without COVID. So what COVID has done is to exacerbate the situation, especially for the poor and vulnerable communities. Yeah.
Hello, and later on.
Hi, how are you doing?
Hi, I'm okay. How are you?
Very good. It's good to have you on.
Thank you. On my full-time job, I work as a research monitoring and evaluation for what we call an improving food and nutritional security for under 5 pregnant and lactating women.
Mm-hmm.
So right now our activities have kind of slowed down because we do a lot of backyard gardening. We do a lot of group counseling in terms of nutrition, under 5 clinics in the communities. So we have a concept of nutrition and food security in our programming. So for now, we are mainly working on responding to the COVID-19, where we have reduced all our community activities, and we're kind of working on radio programs or maybe virtual programs, though it's limiting because we really work in rural communities where they don't have, most of them don't have access to computers, phones, and everything else. So we are relying on our radio programs and our mobile van. We also have mobile van which goes around the communities and engaging people, informing them, sensitizing them about the COVID-19 and how it relates to nutrition and food security. One of which is, at least in Malawi now, we are not exactly in the full lockdown. People are still able to move around. So people still have access to markets. They can still go and fetch for food. But due to closing down of most businesses, what we are promoting now is for communities to make sure they have kept a lot of food, because it was between May and April, May, it was harvesting season. So we are promoting that communities should have a lot of food, should keep a lot of food, and should ensure they have all the kinds of food groups that we promote for them to sustain their nutrition and also at least to be food secure for how long, we don't know how long COVID-19 will exist for. So that's what we have been doing for the past month or so.
So Michael, what made you I know you were quite keen to help us out by co-hosting this food security session. What is it that you think is kind of the biggest challenge at the moment? You were saying it's exacerbated what's already there. Is there anything that's kind of standing out?
Yeah, sure. I would say food system, of course, it's a complex web of other different systems, such as production systems. And when we talk of production, we have crop production, we have animal production, and then we have fisheries and aquaculture. Then we have post-harvest and storage systems. We do have distribution systems, and under distribution, that's where we have transportation activities. Then we have processing systems and value addition, and finally, marketing systems that deliver food to consumers. And I can say the crisis has strained all these systems. For example, in production systems, the input supply chains have been disrupted. Farmers are not able to get seeds, fertilizers, farm tools and equipment, livestock feeds, vet medicines. And it's important to say, especially most of the developing countries do import this kind of inputs from other countries. And currently, we have international trade restricted, there are border closures, there are export bans and all that. Then we also have labor shortages due to quarantine, movement restrictions, and also morbidity. Some farmers have contracted the disease. Then we have mortality, others are dying from it. And also we do have disruption in extension services, which are particularly important to small-scale farmers, because we need to get information, we need to get knowledge to these farmers, especially livestock farmers need animal health support, and they are not able to get all that during this particular time. Then for distribution, of course, transporters have to face a lot of movement restrictions. We know there are various forms of lockdowns in effect in different countries. I have heard of cases where transporters have had to pay bribes at the roadblocks. And of course, it's important to understand that, especially in developing countries, transportation and distribution is dependent on small independent transporters. So if a transporter is required to pay a bribe, or they have to face these restrictions, then they are going to be discouraged to distribute these food products to consumers. Then we have processing systems. Of course, they have also been strained by labor shortages. Of course, it's important to understand that agro-processing is very labor intensive. It's labor intensive by nature. And so in an attempt to keep with the social distancing guidelines, of course, most of them have had to reduce the workforce, and of course that has a direct effect on production. Then on marketing systems have also been disrupted. In many countries, the fresh produce markets have been closed, and I think I should say that especially in developing countries, fresh produce markets are an integral component of the marketing systems. In many developing countries, especially even the urban consumers do not go to places like food supermarkets and grocery stores to buy. Most people go to fresh produce markets, and they have faced closure due to the crisis. And so both consumers are not, both producers and consumers do not have a platform to meet. And so that has led to food insecurity. And then we also have had price volatility. Of course, as you mentioned earlier, some food products have had their prices shoot above the roof. And then in some rural areas, it's important to say that prices of commodities have lowered, especially because of the glut that farmers have had to to deal with the oversupply. And of course, both the producers and consumers are getting affected. Producers, due to the depressed demand of their produce, and they have no places to sell and all that. And then consumers do not have places to buy food. Yes.
So I just want to, if Jusina can you hop on? I just want to, I know that you have kind of firsthand experience of this through your organization. I was just wondering if there are any of those that are kind of jumping up for you as somebody who's in one of the smaller developing states.
Yes, Francis, what Michael is mentioning, it is very true. There's a lot of challenges concerning food and security. Like my organization is basically on the food security part to produce food and sell to retailer shops and trying to distribute to even hospitals. So currently there is a lot of change in terms of the retail shops, the purchasing power, the accessibility in terms of people going to buy. It have really dropped. For example, one of the retailer shops have mentioned that they were like buying 100 units of, for example, cabbages, but now they had to drop to maybe 30 because there are few people who come and buy in the shops because of this lockdown. People don't have an access to easily go and buy anytime they want. And I just recently observed a lot of people are trying to do their home backyard gardens, and that have led to a shoot in demand of seed. And a developing country like the Kingdom of Eswatini is fully relying on importing seed. So there is a scarcity and shortage of seed in the local markets because everyone is trying to produce on his own in terms of backyard gardening. So it is really challenging in terms of accessing planting material, seeds, your seedlings, to mention those key farming inputs. So really, I'm just wondering, post-COVID, what will happen? Because the food issue is really a reality. Everyone is struggling and the prices are shooting. Everyone who has the access to fresh vegetables is really selling at a high price because people have been sensitized. They are aware that the importance of eating fresh vegetables so that you stay healthy to be able to fight this COVID pandemic. So everyone is rushing to ensure that I'm food secure, I'm having food, can I try to produce on my own? And the markets are being affected because there will be issues of oversupply, dumping of food, and even issues of shortages in some other. In terms of studying the market and understanding what to produce, what's available, it will be imbalanced and causing some shortages at the same time. So there are communities that are struggling, like especially rural areas. They don't have those resources to produce on their own. They can't travel, so they are really struggling in terms of having access to input supply, your seeds and seedlings and fertilizers. So it is important to support those communities to ensure they also produce and they have food. So yeah, it is really tough, interesting at the same time, and having a lot of opportunities. Some people take uninformed decision in terms of rushing into production without having the technical know-how, skills, and even studying markets and even taking research in terms of knowing and understanding prices of those farming inputs. So that is what I can share at the moment.
Thank you. That's really interesting you said that, because I know Tia was saying that she's in Samoa and they import all of their seed stock from, I think she said, was it New Zealand, Michael? You were on that call, weren't you? I think it was New Zealand or maybe Australia. And she was saying, you know, we rely massively on importing things that we need, and we don't even have a local Samoan seed bank. And so maybe that's something she was saying that is going to have to come into kind of planning for the future is, you know, we've got so used to being globally connected and we're going to have to dial some things back. Is there anything that you think, Jusina, that now that you're thinking, now that this has happened, you're planning for the future, that you'll be putting into place in your own work to kind of safeguard for future things like this?
Yes, that's very true. In terms of the importance of having a seed bank, like in my business, what we did, immediately we understood that there will be issues in terms of the supply. We rushed into buying seed and keeping it so that we are seed secure for the next 2 farming seasons.
Wow.
And then what we are also doing in terms of ensuring that we assist smallholder farmers, we are using our farm because it's a little bit big to set up quickly a nursery where we'll be producing seedlings for farmers because they are really struggling in terms of accessing seedlings so that they do their production. So that is what we really want to upscale and ensure we assist smallholder farmers because we cannot do it alone. The issue of seed in the agriculture value chain is so important. So farmers ensuring that they have access to seeds is important so that the food value chain is not affected because we were a global community. Food was coming from Texas or China. Now it cannot happen. So we need to strengthen and build our own capacity to ensure that we are food secure for this period of COVID and even beyond, because this impact is going to take time for us to recover and be back into the global economy where we are able to move produce and food around. So really we are hammering and pushing to ensure we serve and help where we can.
Brilliant. Michael, with your organization that's working with cassava, have you had to do any of those kind of things?
Yes, especially we are facing problem in that last year we had a project funded by Comic Relief to support or to facilitate 300 farmers in northern and eastern Kenya to get into improved cassava farming. And how we work, we do have a processing unit as an organization. So once we give farmers the seeds, we do create a market for them. But then because we are dealing with so many farmers in so many communities, we are not able to absorb all of that. So on the sideline, we have some traders, and most of them are women, who buy from fresh cassava tubers from farmers, and then they sell in cities like, in big cities like Nairobi and Mombasa in Kenya. And of course, those traders are not in business anymore because of the movement restrictions. Actually, someone is not able to move from other counties to Nairobi. Nairobi is kind of on a lockdown. And so we are facing problem in that we have new farmers that got into improved cassava farming last year, but they do not have places to sell, and we cannot be able to absorb all that. So we are trying to find resources as an organization so that we can buy from these farmers so that they don't get discouraged. Of course, once a farmer is not able to get a market for their produce, they end up getting discouraged and leaving the farming altogether. And something else that I can say is we are also trying to promote seriously, especially now because our region, the East African region, or what is otherwise called Horn of Africa, is facing locust invasion, actually the worst locust invasion in 70 years. And the crop that we promote, improved cassava, is actually a crop that should be promoted at this time because it's a tuber crop. And what is happening when locusts invade, they feed on those vegetative plants, those vegetative crops. So when they feed on their leaves, the crop die. But then cassava is a tuber crop. So even if locusts were to invade an area, they wouldn't be able to affect the cassava crop. And so we are really trying to promote cassava farming to communities that have not embraced the farming so far, and that is by distributing seeds. And of course, as it has been mentioned, training and information is very, very important because most of the smallholder farmers in rural parts of the developing countries, they are resource poor and they are ignorant. They do not have information. And we're also trying to help other farmers aside from cassava farmers because they are not able to get, as it has been said, essential inputs such as fertilizers. And what we are trying to do now is to tell them or to show them how to make things like compost manure, farmyard manure, all those organic manures in lieu of commercial fertilizers that they cannot be able to buy at such times, so that we can secure food supplies for the future. We do not want to postpone these food crises to the future.
What do you do with the cassava? What do you process it into?
Well, we do process into flour, flour or powder, and that powder is used to make porridge, is used to cook porridge, is used to cook chapati, is used to cook a very popular meal here known as ugali, which is basically thick porridge. And then the leaves, the cassava leaves can also be used as vegetables. So basically what usually happens, it's possible for a family to get their meal from a cassava crop, because the tubers provide the energy, and then the cassava leaves are very rich in protein and essential mineral salts.
I'm just thinking, so you were saying that you're trying to find ways to buy the cassava from the farmers so that they don't get discouraged, and that the flour, is that quite long lasting, like you can stock that up, it's not going to go off? So are you having to find external funding then to cover those extra purchases?
Yes, but we are still searching for partners to assist us buy the excess production from farmers, especially those new farmers. We really don't want them to get discouraged and leave a crop that we had to do a lot of work for them to adopt it.
And is there any way that they can process it themselves, or, you know, even kind of, is it massive plantations that they couldn't handle themselves? Or
yes. Actually, in the project, the first choice or the first goal is to secure food security at the household level.
Okay.
But normally we do promote cassava not just as a food crop for household security, but also as a cash crop to generate incomes and have economic empowerment for these communities. And we generally encourage them to do quite a sized acreage of the crop. So a family is not able to feed on all their cassava in the farm. Of course, several of them and all of them do consume cassava at the household level, but they have to sell the excess. And that is why we do create a market in the processing unit and the traders that we collaborate with.
Yeah, it's really interesting. Noria says, it's interesting to hear about the shortage of seeds due to demand as a result of backyard gardens. Just a suggestion, we promote seed multiplication for our rural communities who have backyard gardens to ensure they keep vegetable seeds, seed potatoes, vines. I think what's really cool about that is in the village where I live in Scotland, when COVID happened, I just set up a little Facebook how to start gardening group. And so all the people in the village who are keen gardeners have been, sharing seedlings and doing the things that you've mentioned on a smaller scale. But the amount of people that didn't know that you could harvest the seeds, that if you kept a couple of plants and didn't pull them up, that they would eventually seed. And it seems to be kind of a knowledge gap that's disappeared, whereas I'm sure 50, 100 years ago, it would have been, it's just what you did. You planted a couple of extra that were your seed source.
Yes, I think there will be need for like capacity building. I agree with you. There is indeed a lot of shortage in terms of usually people when they grow vegetables, once they are done, like the vegetables are maturing, they'll cut the stems down and start preparing for new vegetables. So there's indeed a knowledge gap, and we need kind of capacity building or sensitizations in whatever the easier means to let people know that, okay, you can grow part of your garden to for some time to ensure you harvest the seeds, and how do you keep them to ensure that you can actually use them for next growing season. Yeah, so there will be a need for a lot of capacity building and sensitization on how we do seed multiplication, which might not happen overnight, but yeah, it's something we can be thinking of. Yeah.
Thank you very much. That's very true. I think we just need to build more capacity around that. And what Francis just shared in terms of creating rural seed banks where the farmers can keep their seed and can even share, sell, or better amongst themselves in the rural areas, because seed is very important in farming. So it is really, really important to ensure that we build capacity among smallholder farmers to ensure that they keep seeds. The liquid seed, like the crop they are having now, they are allowed to reach full physiological maturity and ensure that they keep some of the seed for themselves so that they are sustained for the next coming farming season, to ensure that the impact of COVID in terms of globalization, they are not hit very hard, and in terms of the food security, at least they produce for those coming farming season, to ensure that we're not impacted and affected in developing states, especially in Africa.
Mm-hmm.
Another program that I think has been really affected in our countries is the school feeding programs, which are very common in Africa, Latin America, Caribbean, especially to keep school-going children in schools and also for nutritional support. Now with the school closures, of course, children are not able to access such foods, and probably we might end up having malnutritional issues months, years down the line, because we do not know for how long this crisis is going to last.
I think that's very true and very profound, Michael. I've also observed it. A number of the school-going kids, they will suffer due to the issue of malnutrition. That only meal they were getting at school, which was balanced, most of them, they can't afford or they can't have an access to it during this period of COVID pandemic. So it is really, really an issue for concern in communities, and I've observed it. It is not mostly a case in rural areas, even in urban areas. Majority of the children staying there with their parents. Most of their parents, they've lost some jobs due to this COVID pandemic. Manufacturing factories have closed, so they can't get that one meal per day, which is balanced, which they were getting at school, because school feeding programs have closed.
Mm-hmm.
How I wish they were able to get at least one full balanced meal per day, so that they are sustained, because children are easily hit.
So on our side, through our initiative, we're big advocates of conservation agriculture and best practices in terms of how we do agriculture. So I wanted to know from any of you guys in here if that's what you're advocating for. Have you come across any challenges that you can talk about? I hope that's clear.
Yes. Maybe I can contribute to that. Yeah, conservation agriculture, of course, it's very, very important, and especially in poor and vulnerable communities that are composed or consist of resource poor farmers, because what happens, like you find most farmers in the rural areas cannot afford to buy these expensive inputs such as fertilizers, and so through conservation agriculture, they do not have to work on the soils a lot so that they can conserve moisture and nutrients within the soil. So it's something that we have been promoting ourselves in the communities that work with, and we think it's a good thing to do. Conservation agriculture, and then growing food organically. Use of organic manures instead of the commercial fertilizers, use of biological pest control methods instead of chemical pesticides, all those things. They guarantee safe food, and then they also make farming more cost effective for farmers to practice.
Great, thank you so much.
Anyone else? Or we just let Michael wrap up? Over to you, Mike.
Yes, finally, I think I would challenge all of us to try to embrace e-commerce platform, especially at a time like this when marketing systems have been disrupted. If in your community or in your country you do not have well-established e-commerce platforms, you could use the normal social media channels such as Facebook to post produce and generally, and of course, you are going to find people who are interested in the produce, and maybe to also add to that. I think in our various communities, we should try to push our local authorities or national authorities to create what are referred to as green corridors for unimpeded and seamless flow of not just foodstuffs, but both agricultural inputs and outputs. I think we do have the necessary or the requisite lobby power to make sure that we do not compromise food security now and food security in future.
For me, Michael, it's just an appreciation for the points you have raised, and even in terms of trying to sensitize people and helping in terms of the cassava, as we know that most Western and Eastern countries are affected by the locust. So with this tuber crop, we are trying by all means that people at least they survive in terms of food security. So thumbs up, keep up the good work and continue building the capacity of smallholder farmers and trying to create those value chains to assist in terms of food security. So that's what I can.
Big thank you, Michael.
Thank you all.
Thank you. It was really good chatting to you, Emily.
Thank you so much. I loved learning about all of your projects and learning about all your work, and hopefully we'll collaborate in the future.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for hosting me.
Thank you.
Bye.